At the Julian Way, we empower individuals with disabilities to thrive in faith communities by breaking barriers and fostering belonging. Your support helps us create accessible spaces where everyone feels valued and seen. Join us in making a difference today at www.thejulianway.org. Together, we can build communities of belonging.
Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to another episode of Palsies with Palsies. I'm your palsy, Justin Hancock.
And I'm your palsy, Bekah Marin Anderson.
Good
Hey,
afternoon,
Justin.
Bekah. Hey.
How many things can we say in unison today?
Yes, and that kind of fits with the crazy word salad that is this week. How you doing, Bekah?
I have a brain. I definitely have a brain. That's a thing that people have that I have.
Well, I am so glad that your brain and yourself have taken time to take a break from the billion and one paperwork related things that you are doing this week.
So many paperwork.
Have a really interesting conversation, and we have a guest.
We do. Yes, I am so excited. We are welcoming to the show today Bryan P. Stone. Bryan is the Leighton K. Farrell Endowed Dean and Professor of Theology at Perkins School of Theology. He has some really amazing research interests that at some point my Braille device will let me skip to the part of the webpage that reminds me what they are.
So, for our listeners, one of the great things I get to do as a way of, as a part of my ministry and a way of getting the name of the Julian Way out there and giving back to my beloved Perkins School of Theology is I am on the alumni council for the school, and we had the pleasure of meeting Bryan in his role as dean at Perkins several months ago as an alumni group, and he shared what they're doing at Perkins and shared a little bit of his academic interest in pop culture and theology, and specifically cinema and theology. And I don't know his experience of this situation, but when I heard the area of interest of particularly horror cinema and theological intersection, I literally almost jumped out of my chair and tackled him that minute and said, you've got to be on the show. This would be an amazing interview. And then shortly thereafter, he told us he wrote a book about it, which sealed the deal. So, so excited that you're on the show, Bryan. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us.
Very happy to.
Yeah,
technically I'm on the alumni council as dean, and I've not been invited, and we're going to change that. I'm actually supposed to be a part of the alumni council.
Well, we should change that.
Well, you'll see more of me going forward.
I'll look forward to it, friend. I'll look forward to it. So, Bekah, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Justin said, we're just so excited to talk to you about your book, Christianity and Horror Cinema. I know you have a lot of other really diverse research interests here: evangelism in contemporary contexts, practical theology, theology in public life, faith formation, and religious conversion. And having read the book, I can see how a lot of those work into this book. And on the Palsies with Palsy show before, we've talked about the intersections of horror cinema with disability and queerness, and some of those themes definitely show up in your book as well. So just I guess just to start with, what led you to this interest? What made you want to write a book about Christianity and horror movies?
Well, thank you very much for having me today. It's a subject that's been one of my passion. Well, theology and film has been one of my passions for probably 40 years. I've wrote book. One of my earliest books was Faith in Film, where I walked through the Apostles' Creed phrase by phrase and put it in dialogue with a film, each phrase, in order to think about what we believe as Christians. It was a lot of fun. But I grew up loving horror movies. Scary movies were just my thing. I even remember having little glow-in-the-dark models of like the werewolf and Dracula and Frankenstein, little plastic models. And so I grew up watching those old black and whites. But when I got old enough to go to the movies more, things like Alien were coming out, and a lot of sci-fi stuff actually. But as I was teaching film, early on, one of my first articles was about just a short article on how religion and horror intersect so much. And so then I always wanted to do a book-length treatment out of that. And eventually, over the last decade, I did do that. It took about 7 or 8 years to write the book because I would spend, a year just working on, for example, zombies, or a year on witches, ghosts, vampires, psychological horror, nature horror, like King Kong and such. And so it's probably one of the most fun books I've ever written.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes total sense that it took that long. Each of those categories that you just described is one of the chapters in the book, and you reference so many movies in each of them.
Yeah, I had to watch hundreds.
You were really thorough in your treatment of those subgenres.
What kind of interested me early on, and what really became the argument of the book, is that in Western horror cinema, at least, Christianity has thoroughly shaped the kind of horror that we get in various ways, sometimes very direct, as with the vampire legend and, obviously the crucifix and all of that. But even more other sorts of horror, like nature, we are so alienated from nature in the West. And Christianity is not unrelated to that dualism. We have the body spirit dualism in the West is powerful, and it shows back up in horror movies. So my case is the monsters of Western cinema are those for which Christianity is in many ways largely responsible.
So I'm interested in a number of things. I will admit that I fall much more on the psychological suspense end of the horror genre, like things like Silence of the Lambs and Seven and Primal Fear and things like that, because I have a very severe startle reflex. So you can imagine that The Exorcist would not be a great time for me unless I was fairly heavily medicated or otherwise. But I'm interested just from a process standpoint, and maybe a little bit humorously, what was it like when you told your friends, colleagues, and loved ones that these 37, 40, hundreds of horror movies you were watching was for work? And did you get the sense that you were getting to mix like what you love to do anyway with your calling? And what was that like?
Absolutely. A lot of people were like, you've got the best job ever. If you get to sit and talk about scary movies and do it and get paid for it. I think also there's just immediately the ability to connect with everyday people and have fun theological conversations, because it's not that high, heady stuff. I mean, I use a lot of theory, but it's everyone's watched these. Not everyone. A lot of people have watched these movies and they love to talk about it. Who doesn't want to talk about zombies? Come on, and whatever you think about it.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, and I imagine a lot of people, like, once you bring up the topic, they can connect with it and be like, oh yeah, Christianity does have a lot to do with these movies.
A lot of people don't like horror movies, and that's so they're averse, but they still have room to talk about it. My wife, for example, would never watch any of these movies with me. So I had to fly solo on that.
Well, so one of the places one of the things that I have been thinking about ever since I read it, really, is this part in the introduction of the book where you talk about how Christianity tends to shy away, or at least Western Christianity tends to shy away from a lot of very strong negative emotions, including fear. And the various emotions associated with horror, that often, especially in our progressive circles, we don't want to talk about how fear might have some sort of theological importance, even though, like, the fear of God is something that shows up in the Bible a lot. And I was just wondering if you could say more about that, about that connection between theology and emotion.
Yeah, Christianity for 2,000 years so influenced by Greek philosophical modes of thought that really did not value emotions. And the God of Greek philosophy is unchangeable, unfeeling, pure word. And so much of Christian theology has been shaped by this idea that God is word, and such that emotions just haven't counted. This has sometimes been very explicit. Now, Catholics and Orthodox churches have always embraced the material and the sensory, and in order to evoke moods and affects. But Protestantism, especially, kind of has over the centuries, washed that away in favor of just the word. So it was iconoclastic. There's a lot of stuff you could read on that. But there's I think a recovery, and fear would be even more so because we're not supposed to fear, right? And so to embrace that emotion or somehow validate it as something worth talking about has been probably one of the biggest problems in terms of dealing with emotion and affect in theology. But more and more is being done on affect theory these days. More is being done on horror movies and sort of and all emotions. Even Aquinas thought that fear was important in proper relation. You couldn't have courage if you didn't have a certain amount of fear, a proper amount of fear. That's not courage. That's just stupidity to go surging into a unsafe area. So fear, I think the best of theology wants to explore all of our emotions, and I certainly want to make room for that when it comes to fear.
And I hear you too, connecting emotions with sensory experience, right? That, like, part of what Protestantism has really rejected is both the embodied experience of our senses, of the ways in which our what we hear and see and smell can impact our theology and our relationship with the divine in favor of pure word. But then that also, like, when we're disembodied, our feelings live in our bodies. So
that's right.
Separate from them.
The philosophers talked about the three transcendentals: the good, the true, and the beautiful. And those are the superlatives and the transcendentals. And what's good is true, what's true is beautiful, what's beautiful is good. They should be interchangeable. But in the West, we really set aside beauty as a theological category. It's always about knowing or acting. So it's always the good or the true, or the good or the true. But the beautiful, but there's a recovery of beauty in contemporary theology and the role of the aesthetics in theology, and I love it. I just want to embrace it.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
I'm curious. I can't get away from film and history and kind of looking at the things that we value on a long-term historical level and how that's been represented through film. Uh,
Yes.
when I took two courses that really confirmed my love for movies in undergrad. One was a history of the Cold War through cinema, and the other was a history of the Vietnam conflict through
Oh,
cinema.
wow.
Which was
Mm.
the Vietnam class was one of the more wonderful experiences I had, but my dad was deployed at the time, so
Mm.
very visceral. But on a sort of framework level, I am always fascinated by particularly Christianity's relationship to innocence and to uh, youth. And I mean, even our Christ begins as a child. And there's so much in horror, and particularly when you combine it with religious imagery, things like Rosemary's Baby, things like The Omen, even Poltergeist, and other films like that. I'm curious about, do you think is it natural for us as humans to sort of want to take what is like standard religious iconography and kind of play with it or subvert it? And do you think that's a good thing, a neutral thing, otherwise? Does that make sense?
Yes, sir, it does. Horror is probably at its best when it's subverting that which we hold to be dear and near and innocent and pure, and then either showing it under attack or showing that it wasn't that way really after all, and maybe it is even the monster. So you get, a beautiful witch who underneath that facade is really something evil. Uh, Now we can talk more about witches, but the point here is though horror has always done that, even before there was cinema, to work on our to kind of destabilize what we value, call it into question. And some people don't like it for that reason, but I think it's good to be self-critical and to ask ourselves, um, what why do we hold these things to be valuable and what are we eclipsing when we do?
Yeah,
Purity is
Yeah.
one of those big things that shows up throughout all horror film. Um, and that which we call pure is oftentimes racially inflected or gender inflected, and
Hmm.
or it certainly has to do with sexuality. And horror just comes in underneath that stuff and troubles it. And
yeah,
I think it's fun to
Yeah.
watch what's happening. And all those things are in touch with the time. So if Vietnam is still something that's weighing heavy on our collective culture, then horror is going to stick its finger in that and just move it around and that's just that's it's going to show up for that. If we're worried
hmm
about during the Cold War, as you said you took a course on that,
yeah,
then there will be stand-ins for that. Aliens basically are stand-ins for the Russians. They're invading, and in the 50s and 60s, they represent those geopolitical anxieties. So
yeah,
it's fun. I think it's fun to
Yeah.
read film in context and understand what it's doing, what it's playing on. Body horror is so big now,
Mm.
precisely because of the uneasy relationship to the body we have in the West, and that's just not going away anytime soon. Body horror.
exactly.
I actually have a quote that I took down from your book that I think really gets at a particular part of this. It's you quoting director George Romero, where he's talking about how the most important thing about horror and sci-fi is not to restore order, to leave the world as we know it in bloody shreds, which is really why we are doing this in the first place. We don't want things the way they are, or we
Right.
wouldn't be trying to shock you into an alternative place.
Yeah,
Like,
I love that
I think
quotation.
that's just so powerful to me that, like, yeah, like I think different horror movie directors or writers or what have you have different opinions on that, right? That, like, horror is always bringing up these anxieties and these questions of what is culturally salient at the time, and some movies are kind of like exposing that, maybe the normal isn't
Yes.
okay, maybe there's something monstrous in the everyday, and then putting it nicely back in a box and saying,
Right.
the horror was defeated, normality restored, everything's fine. Whereas other directors are really interested in saying, like, no, actually, like, we are the zombies are us, and we can't actually escape that.
Yeah, you can't put that back in the box in most zombie movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great thing. I think that changed from about the 60s on, where horror became more open-ended, um, less closure. And then in the 70s and 80s, you have the movies ending with openness, and then of course the sequels. And so it's just another way of saying the monster's just going to keep coming back.
Mhm.
So we've mentioned body horror, which feels like perhaps a slightly ham-handed transition into a more of a disability-related
Absolutely.
section on this, but I have always been, for Halloween a couple years ago, Brian, we did an episode on the movie. Was it Freaks, Rebecca? Or was that with Rebecca Mids?
I think
I
that
mean,
one was with Rebecca Metz.
Freaks, 1932 Freaks, but Todd
Yes.
Browning's film is an amazing one to talk about in terms of horror film and disabilities. Horror film has had its share of villainizing people with disabilities, turning them into
Mm-hmm.
villains, whether that's Captain Hook or Voldemort, or even the James Bond villains,
Mm-hmm.
people, Texas Chainsaw Massacres, Leatherface. The physical disfigurement and disability signifies, um, horror. And Freddy Krueger is a good example of this. There's a burn victim, just to
Mm-hmm.
signify that distortion of the body as a distortion of the soul. But what, what horror also does, and probably about an equal measure, is to subvert that.
Mm.
And freaks, we could never make freaks today, where it's this collection of actors who are disfigured or marginalized, whether they what they used to call pinhead or
Mm-hmm.
a bearded woman, stuff like that. What it does is, throughout that film, it shows them to be the ones who actually, despite their outward disfigurement, are the ones who are beautiful of soul and heart. And the beautiful person is the one who's disfigured spiritually. And so it actually does that. I think the same thing happens with Hunchback of Notre Dame. He's not the monster ultimately. And so it plays on that and it subverts it. But it also does it by showing disfigurement and disability in a negative light. So it's
Mm-hmm.
complex.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite stories as a guy that probably spends more time watching. I'm more likely to watch the making of documentary on the DVD than the movie itself.
I love that.
But one of my favorite stories in that vein is that Jonathan Demme, when he was casting for Silence of the Lambs, cast Anthony Hopkins because he saw him play the doctor in The Elephant Man. This very humane, decent, kind individual. And he, like we've been talking about, he was just so fascinated by okay, what if he played that character but was locked in this utterly insane or, mentally unwell individual? And I've always found that to be uh, subverting expectations, even in the way you cast a movie like that, to be fascinating.
It is, and mental health is really kind of, as a disability and a horrifying one, really came into its own, of course, in the 60s with movies like Psycho,
Hmm.
Repulsion, um, but they had shown up earlier in I can't think of the movie M, just the letter M. Uh, plays on that too. Shows a villain who's just a child predator, but who's distorted spiritually, just as their real problems are mental health problems, but they blur the line there.
Mm.
And even with body horror in the late 20th and early 21st century, there's still a sense that psychological danger is very big. It just shows itself up through the body.
Yeah.
Mm,
So psychological horror and body horror is hard to distinguish in some cases. They merge.
yeah.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I was thinking about is like, the body horror is sometimes supposed to show the twistedness of the soul, but it's also sometimes about like something being done to someone, right? Like
Yes.
and kind of like exploring the suffering of innocence in some ways, and like I was thinking especially about your discussion of The Exorcist and how just all of the really gruesome things that happen to the little girl in that movie is about like this suffering that is being visited upon her, and you draw a connection between that and the way that a lot of Christian theologies consider suffering to be redemptive, but especially
Yes.
suffering if it's happening to someone marginalized.
Especially if it's
Um,
a young girl. I mean, young girls
exactly.
are always going to pay the price in horror movies.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Because
And I just, yeah.
their agency is what our culture fears the most. Female
Yeah.
agency has always been scary to Christians, and so it just shows up. It continues to show up in films, not just in witch films, but in films, horror more generally. The liminal period of a young girl coming into her own sexuality, coming into her own agency, has always been
Mhm.
destabilizing for the church, and uh,
Mm.
and so you put them on the fringes, on the marginalized, or you condemn them just for being women through heresy manuals, witchcraft, or witch hunting manuals, how to do it. The church has that, just even though that may be an older period in time, we sometimes think 17th century or 16th century, they just keep making witch films because women continue to
Yeah.
still have agency in a world that doesn't want it. Um,
Yeah.
so you're going to keep seeing those films.
Yeah. No, and I think that's another interesting tension of the like horror movies frequently are exposing like the repression of these women is a bad thing. Like, they're showing there is some
Yeah.
need for agency, but then also that agency becomes terrifying and horrific and needs to be put a stop to.
Yeah, and the church is, portrayed like in The Exorcist as the one that brings normalcy back to the situation when the woman goes out of control.
Hmm.
The actual demon possession you could read as certainly horrifying and an attack on her, but you could also read it as the way young female's agency is perceived as demonic, and
Sure.
so the male priest comes in and fixes everything, and all's well at the end.
Hmm.
But not all versions of Exorcist end the same, and there's some that are more open-ended. The director's cut was more open-ended, actually. So you
Mm.
didn't know, you kind of left normalcy as maybe not restored completely.
Yeah, tell us about that. How does the director's cut end?
Yeah, well, with uh the without any sort of reconciliation between the priest and his friend and the mother, uh,
Hmm.
where it just leaves the uh, the question of whether what happened to the demon open. Like, did it go into
Mm,
the priest and he died? But then where's the demon now? And that's why,
mm,
of course, there's still the sequels of there were Exorcist 2, Exorcist 3. It could build on that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I'm reversing myself here. The director's cut wanted he wanted to establish the continuity. So there was an exchange of a medallion after the death of the priest, where the
Hmm.
priest friend gives it to the mother, and so kind of like the goodness. The writer of The Exorcist was always worried that people came away with such a negative view of good and evil. He did it to show
Mm,
that good conquers evil. But people
Mm.
left that
right.
movie still in states of anxiety where they did not experience that closure. So the
Yeah.
director's cut gives more closure.
Interesting.
Yeah, I had reversed that when I said it.
So, that that leads me to another question, and I think I can probably guess your answer, but I would rather ask you. I think of movies like The Exorcist and uh, Omen, particularly coming out in the late 70s and early 80s, uh, right on the crest or in the beginning of the crest of what we know culturally as the uh, satanic panic. And in a lot of the response to that phenomenon from the church, both at the time and kind of looking back on it in the mid 90s and taking stock of it, was that, well, all this cultural stuff is out here, and it's no wonder that this happened because we have all this pop culture paraphernalia of it. So, but I tend to think that the pop culture reflects broader anxieties
Yes.
in the society. How
Hmm.
does it strike you that so much of the horror that we now define as classic came right on the crest of that phenomenon?
There's so many things happening in the 60s all at once, and you just can't overestimate the importance of the 1960s for how horror has unfolded throughout the last century. Because
Mm,
it's in the 60s where all the institutions of Western culture begin to come under attack, whether that's religion or whether that's the state. Certainly, psychology is ascendance begins to cast doubts on the stability of our own minds. What we thought was secure, everything now is insecure. Everything is out of control, and so you could take I mean, conservative Christianity will find its scapegoats there. It could be other
Mm-hmm.
religions. It could be women. It's no accident that vampires, witches, and Satanists are all kind of coming together as the enemy in the 60s.
hmm.
Uh, so I make the case in the book that in 1968, in October, I think it was October 1 or 2nd, is changed. That's when postmodernity began,
Mm,
because that's when Night of the Living Dead came out in a little small theater in Pittsburgh, Fulton County Theater.
Mm-hmm.
And
hmm.
prior to that time, zombies were those who were made zombies by a evil witch doctor or an alien. They turn you into a zombie. But after that point, there was no one. You weren't a zombie because you were under the control of someone else. You were completely out of control. The zombie
Mm.
is not under the control of anything. It is just for no reason a
Mm.
body completely out of control, complete urge without any sort of direction, just hungry all the time, but not having any sort of need for food. Kind of the way we shop. We don't really need anything. We just want to go shopping. So just sheer
Mhm.
desire, sheer urge. And
Mm-hmm.
it represents, I think, in that moment, a change from secure institutional control, closure, to completely everything's off, everything's on the table. You can go at anything now. I love watching, tracing that historically.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much there about, the earlier horror kind of has this sense of like the institutions can keep this in check. We can,
Right. The cross
this,
still works against vampires
yeah.
back then, but after the 70s, the cross kind of quits working. Um, uh, that right there is symbolic, I think, of kind of what's going on in culture, with religion. Religion's power is not what it used to be.
Mhm.
But neither is the military's power. It doesn't win
Yeah.
either. These monsters are now not King Kong and Dracula and vampires and or Frankenstein, but they're like our next door neighbor, like Jason. People with names like Freddy and Jason and Michael. They could be
Mhm.
your next door neighbor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So one thing that I've been thinking about, and maybe this isn't even a question that makes sense given the history and the present of horror cinema, but I was noticing that like so much of what works its way into horror movies is the more conservative, more repressive theologies of Christianity, at least how I would view them, I guess. Um, and I think that makes sense given that a lot of that is older theologies, and so therefore more part of the institutional establishments, right? That
Yeah.
horror movies are so often working with and against and in conversation with. But thinking about the ways in which Christianity is kind of woven together with fear of the other and
Yeah.
with opposition to sexuality and to the agency of women and to queer folk. And I guess I'm just sort of wondering, like, is there a way? In what ways is more progressive theology in conversation with horror cinema, or does that even make sense given that I think progressive theology doesn't seek to be an institution that would have enough that would have
Yeah.
the kind of institutional power that that other forms of Christianity have and do.
Well, you're really hitting on a very good point here. I think, uh, so much of early horror cinema kind of does take the kind of the party line with, you know, God, goodness, and virtue winning out over the monster at the end all the time. And Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
with its cross, is right there at the center of that. But again, in the 60s, that starts to get destabilized to the point where it starts to expose Christian Puritanism as the monster itself. So even in the witch
Yeah.
hunting movies of the 60s, the witch hunters, I remember one especially that Vincent Price plays, this witch hunter general, witch finder general. And you instinctively don't like him. You don't like the Christian witch hunters. They're just
Mm-hmm.
nasty. They make up stuff. They make up evidence just to condemn women. Um, so Hollywood's already doing that, kind of exposing. I don't think that progressive Christianity is an institutional force
Yeah.
in cinema the way conservative Christianity is, and conservative Christianity always has that more institutional, fixed truth kind of thing that then horror film
Yeah.
likes to subvert.
Mm-hmm.
But progressive theologians and thinkers definitely approach the feminist and queer study of horror film with these lenses that appreciate horror's ability to be radical, to be subversive, and not just to perpetuate the status quo. I think that's one of the
Hmm.
reasons why feminists actually do a lot of good work on horror film, is because they
Yeah.
can see it. They can see in it as a partner. It's also got a lot of problems. I mean, it's
Yeah.
you gotta know, anyone's got to know that when you watch horror film, a lot of
Yeah.
it is misogynist through and through.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I think it's like kind of in that similar vein of like, representation is not the be all end all of how to analyze a horror movie by any stretch of the imagination. But like, I found myself reading your book like wishing just once that like the religious characters were a bit more progressive in their theology and
I
could be the good guys without needing to be the institution, you know.
exactly,
And it's
exactly,
like, I
yeah.
just don't know that horror can really conceptualize that right now.
Nope, I don't think you're going to see much of it. You're not going to see much of it. It's interesting that the newest version and installation of The Exorcist has a little bit more of a kind of a progressive view, in the sense that it now,
Mm,
instead of having the Catholic priest come in and fix things, it has a Catholic priest working with a Pentecostal Baptist preacher with a
right.
traditional religions, um, a woman who's they makes potions and stuff. In other words, it brings together religious diversity
Hmm.
as kind of
Mhm.
attacking this same problem, and it kind of subverts the standard plot in that way.
Okay, so yeah, so that's kind of an example of that.
Yeah, I talk a bit about Wood. Oh, can I think of his name now? In the Robin Wood, sorry, the
Mm,
writer, the film critic, about the revolutionary potential of horror film. And there is plenty of that there. He also notes,
mhm.
though, that um, whenever the triumph against a monster is connected to Christianity, it's automatically going to be conservative, because Christianity is,
Yeah.
the home institution for the West. So when Christianity wins in a horror
Yeah.
film, it's going to be conservative.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty hard for you to find that progressive,
Yeah.
radical Christian winning. They're usually going to be losing.
Yeah. No, I mean, maybe I should be hoping for the
Wear it like a badge of honor. I don't know.
yeah.
So I'm I'm curious, Brian, as a critical theorist and someone that communicates with this on an intellectual and a theological level, but it sounds very much like a fan as well. Also,
Yeah.
I think of exciting new things, and I automatically think of Ryan Coogler and Sinners and Keegan-Michael Key and Get Out and other films as well. What do you what do you want to see? What do you hope that this genre can tell us and play with in the next 4 to 5 to 10 years, if that's not too broad a question?
Sure. No, I'll just identify a couple things that I'm enthusiastic about and would love to see more of. One is what's going on with black horror,
Hmm.
from Nope to Us to Get Out to Sinners. What black horror has been able to do over the last decade is just some amazing work at showing
Mhm.
how the monstrous is also very much social, built into our social structures. You might also call it social horror. The monsters are not out there in Transylvanian castles or in, among shaken rattles and with like ghosts. there are prejudices, there are systemic racism, there are misogyny, and black horror has just done a great job at exposing that. That underneath the veneer
Mm.
of whiteness, there is a monster.
Hmm.
Of white purity, there's a monster, and you get this in Get Out. I think is one of the best films ever. But what I love about Sinners is the way it layers it with religion as well. And religion actually does come off well there.
Hmm.
Religion comes from the past and it connects with the present. And those who are truly good are not necessarily those who have the veneer of religiosity, but they're sinners. And
Mm.
and I think it actually is one of those examples of progressive, critical and religious perspectives, and of course, all intertwined with music. Another one
Mm.
trend I like is the trend towards less institutional spirituality and folk religion or folk horror that you get in sort of the A24 films.
Mhm.
This company has been producing really off the wall stuff like The Witch or Midsummer, that look at horror outside of institutional religion, maybe in paganism or in older religions that we think have gone away, but maybe just went under subterranean, but have the ability to come back up. And those things, when you have a dominant Christianity for 20 centuries, you may think the divine feminine, for example, is just gone, but it actually still lurks underneath, ready to come and get us. We don't give it due respect. So
Mm.
nature horror, combined with pagan horror and spirituality that's less institutionalized. A24 films and folk horror in general is just exploring those in some really interesting ways.
Mm.
Hereditary is one of those movies that came out too around those.
I was gonna say, if you can tell me what The Lighthouse is about, I.
Well, boy, I know you would ask. Well, but I do think that it's actually a good example of how folk horror intersects with psychological horror. The graininess of the film and the birds and the role they play there with nature. So nature, psychological horror, and it's all coming together there.
It's
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I mean
yeah.
it sounds to me like and I tracked this in the book as well, but that yeah, there's a lot of horror now and some historically, but especially now that like really locates the evils of society in places that make more sense to me, at least.
Right?
That
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
historically get, the evil is women coming of age, and the evil is queer people, and
Yeah.
and that's like exciting from a marginalized perspective to be able to see those monsters in their power, but then you have to watch them get defeated too.
Right.
And so, but now we get to have these movies where we can say no, white supremacy is evil. Like that is and the ways that humans devastate nature and don't care for the earth. Like that's and
Right.
then you know surprise, the planet doesn't like that. you know like
I'm surprised there
there's a
actually
lot
haven't
that's really exciting.
been more climate change horror. There's some, but
Yeah.
I would think there would be more, and I anticipate there being more. I know there will be more around AI and the
Hmm.
problem, or it's not a problem, but one of the realities is that when you get into movies like AI, you're really getting more into science fiction than horror. So a lot of science fiction
Yeah.
is horror, but drawing the line between those two is almost impossible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
much of our fear is around technology now
Mm.
and and um and surveillance. And
Yeah.
so you get that now more and more in movies where you're being watched and uh, or followed. And we'll see how that goes. I think that's a lot of room for growth in horror and with AI.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Do you I guess the way I would put this is we've talked so much over the last hour or so about what horror can teach us and how it makes us comfortable with our emotions and with various experiences. If someone came to you and said, "I read your book, I'm having a hard time buying it," uh, what is, I guess, what's one film that you would point to in terms of if you had to pull one out as a teaching tool or a mirror to look through? Do you have a favorite film to go to for those purposes?
Boy, it's like asking which of your children you love the best.
I,
It's
no,
it's so hard. But I mean, I'll just single out the one I mentioned a while ago, which is Get Out. I
Mhm.
just think it's a great example of the layers that are there in horror, the possibilities in a horror film that aren't just about the standard monster. Um,
Mhm.
and I love thinking about that movie. But I think probably each genre, I have favorites there. Um, I really think a ghost story with the one that features Casey Affleck, 2017, A Ghost Story, is another great one because it's what some people have called post horror, or one writer called post horror. It doesn't work in the standard genre conventions like a ghost, is supposed to be like. Well, I mean, it's not giving away any secrets to say that this ghost in this movie is wearing a sheet with two eye holes cut out throughout the whole movie. I mean, how ludicrous is that
Mhm.
as a ghost movie? It just does that, but it's a meditation on non-existence and well, do our lives matter and what is our significance, which is more dread producing to think and to really come to the full realization that in 2 generations after you're dead, you most of us will not even be a memory. Anyone who knew us
Yeah.
won't know us. And unless you've written some books on horror film and left them behind, you probably have no artifacts. You just, uh, but what could be more dread producing than your absolute non-existence? And when you can really meditate on that, it's quite
Mm.
scary. And
yeah.
so it doesn't do the jump scares that you're going to get with your standard ghost movies, but I think it's a fascinating metaphysical, religious, and spiritual meditation on death and existence. Highly recommended.
I'll keep it
Awesome.
in mind.
It's slow going, patient.
I love a good slow burn, my friend, not a problem.
There you go. And ghost movie, I think I like ghost movies because they're so atmospheric. After about the 80s on, they have as many jump scares as any other kind of movie, but I love just that evocative, kind of slow burn horror that just sneaks up on you. The Shining
Mhm.
is that way for me. I with
Oh
Jack
my
Nicholson.
gosh.
Mm.
Now you're talking about this could be a 9 hour podcast,
So
Bekah,
deliberate in its
honestly.
Oh.
pacing.
Mm.
Uh, there's some
Well,
good even
Brian,
vampire movies and even zombie movies that are slower going. 28 Days Later was a really thoughtful and deeply, I think, spiritual movie about, you know, existence and
Mm.
zombies and the body.
Hmm.
Oh, you're getting me going now. But I have to start naming films.
Yeah. Okay.
I was
Well.
gonna say we could talk to you for 9 hours and have you
This
name
is what I think
and
most
describe all
people
the
like talking
films.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Well.
as we get close to as we say on the show, landing the plane. I guess I would just ask Brian, is there anything that we haven't covered that if we're gonna talk about Christianity and horror, we really can't leave without at least touching on?
Well, um, I don't know. I think we maybe didn't talk as much about nature horror as we could, but we probably said enough about
Hmm.
about the body. Um, I just think I think one of the findings that was so important to me as I was doing this research was if you start with the position that Christianity is such an anthropocentric religion that it has set itself over against nature, the body, women, materiality, all, just almost a constant. It's just not a surprise that horror capitalizes on that instability between the human and nature, between the human and the role of women in culture, the human and nature. It just constantly coming back to get us. And in the West, it's different than in Asian horror. And I just hadn't really thought about it or discovered it until I watched these movies. There are hundreds, maybe even you could say close to 1,000, let's just say hundreds of movies in the West where animals come and get us. Birds, Jaws, those are the kind. I mean, but they're just hundred. Every time you turn around, there's snakes on a plane, or there's a cocaine bear, or Sharknado. Animals are out to get us. You could only count on one hand the number of animal horror films there are in Asian cinema. It just doesn't exist. Mythological creatures from nature like King Kong or Godzilla, yes, but not animals. They just don't come and get you. So what does that say about us in the West? What's our situation? And we ought to we really need to be waking up. I think horror film in general is trying to wake us up to our complicity in environmental destruction, and I hope we listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's my last shot.
Again,
Awesome.
another 4 hours on the show, Brian.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me. It's been fun to do this. I didn't know I'd have anything to say, and I have not stopped talking since you.
Oh my goodness, you absolutely so many wonderful things to say. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us. It's been so fantastic. And thank you, everyone, for joining us as listeners. We are so glad to have you in the Palsies with Palsies space. If you have an idea for a show that you'd like to suggest, or a question about something we've talked about, or a question that you'd like us to answer about disability, queerness, pop culture, please reach out to us. You can email us at pwp@thejulianway.org. You can also reach us on our Palsies with Palsies Facebook page. And if you like the podcast, if you're enjoying this, if this is bringing something important into your life, please make sure to hit that follow or subscribe button in your podcast app. And if you could go and leave us 5 stars, write us a review, that helps people find us. Really helps the show out a lot. And if you're feeling like really going the extra mile and making sure that we get to keep making the show, you can also donate to support the show at thejulianway.org/donate. That is how Justin and I are able to spend our time having wonderful conversations like this. And if you stumbled across this and you don't know where to find more, there are so many great places you can find more. You can find us at Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all the places where fine podcasts can be found. We'll hope to talk to you again soon. And until then, go out and put some good into the world. Thanks, friends.
Bye.
Bye.